Tonight, breaking news, Senator Tim Scott announcing he is running for president. Our exclusive interview tonight, moments after he launched that campaign. The Republican from South Carolina declaring his run for the White House in his hometown of North Charleston, painting himself as a candidate of optimism and one that can persuade voters. The only black Republican in the Senate, calling himself a true conservative with a backbone. But we pressed him directly. Does he have what it takes to set himself apart in a crowded GOP field? You offer voters that former President Trump will not? The senator's answer to that question, plus where he stands on abortion, immigration, and foreign policy, and why he says both Trump and DeSantis got it wrong on Ukraine. Scott now the sixth major candidate to throw his hat in the ring for the Republican nomination. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis now just days away from announcing his own campaign. We'll take a look at how Scott stacks up to the competition as we enter the most consequential week of the election so far. In Washington tonight, President Biden holding a critical Oval Office meeting with House Republicans. Is there still time to avoid a catastrophic government default? What we're hearing from Capitol Hill at this hour. Idaho murder suspect arraigned, the man accused of killing 4 students at the University of Idaho, appearing before a judge today. Why he went silent when asked to enter a plea. Plus, at least 12 people killed at a soccer match stampede in El Salvador. Crowds packed into one of the biggest stadiums in Central America. Why officials say this event took such a frightening turn. And have you seen these heroes, a group of bystanders racing to save a motorcyclist who was trapped underneath a car? Why Omaha police are now trying to track them down. Top story starts right now. Hey, good evening. We thank you for joining us for a special edition of Top Story. We are live tonight from Charleston Southern University in beautiful South Carolina. And it has been a huge day for the Palmetto State as the race for 2024 shifts right into high gear. In a rally right here at his alma mater, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, you see him right there, formally announcing that he is running for president of the United States, painting himself as the candidate to lead America as it stands at a crossroads.
Victimhood or victory? Grievance or greatness? I choose freedom and hope and opportunity. Will you choose it with me?
Scott, the only black Republican currently serving in the Senate and the first to be elected since Reconstruction, striking a positive and aspirational tone as he kicked off his campaign, recounting his humble upbringing in North Charleston, where he was raised by a single mother. The senator joining a very crowded field of Republican hopefuls, including former President Trump, of course, the early frontrunner, and fellow South Carolinian Nikki Haley, who as governor appointed Scott to a vacant Senate seat in 2012. And that already jam-packed field is only expected to grow larger. Former Vice President Mike Pence, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, just some of the names considering launching a bid. And later this week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also expected to formally announce his campaign. DeSantis, perhaps the biggest threat to former President Trump with the greatest name recognition on a national stage. But when it comes to primary politics, the schedule can be as important as the polling. So let's take a look. You have the Iowa caucus up first, then the New Hampshire primary, and then third. And this could be key, the South Carolina primary. Scott, of course, though, likely to have a home field advantage here, but along with Governor Haley. In an exclusive sit-down interview, Senator Scott speaking to us about how he's thinking about his GOP competitors, his stance on critical issues, including immigration, abortion, and foreign policy, and why he thinks he's the right person for the job. Here's a portion of our interview with the senator just moments after he made that major announcement. You have a very positive message, a hopeful message. You quote scripture, and yet the two people leading the GOP field right now, former President Trump and Governor DeSantis, they're not afraid to demonize their opponents. So my question to you is, do you think GOP voters want someone carrying a Bible, or do they want someone driving a bulldozer into the Democrats?
Well, it depends on whether you're willing to hit somebody with that Bible if necessary. That's kind of the question, right? One thing that you'll learn about the gospel is that in both Old Testament and New Testament, Jesus took a whip out and tore up the synagogue because he had no choice. So the truth is that what people really want is an optimistic, positive, conservative, who has a backbone, but also believes that the best is yet to come.
You know, in 2021, you said you would support former President Trump if he ran again for re-election. He's running, but now you just announced your candidacy. What changed?
I believe America can do for anyone what she has done for me. That's why I'm focusing on restoring hope, creating opportunities, and making sure that we protect the America that we have. I also believe that we have to have a president that persuades, not just within our base, but even on the other side of the aisle. I know I am the candidate that best gets that done.
So explain that a little more to me, because it sounds like you're trying to draw a contrast there. What will you offer voters that former President Trump will not?
Well, the question is, I'm running for president, period. I plan to win. So the question is, what do the voters want in their president? They want someone who can persuade on the issues that matter the most to them.
You know, I've covered President Trump for a long time. I've never seen him do this.
He
sent out a tweet saying, "Good luck to Senator Tim Scott in entering the Republican presidential primary race." He's complimenting you. It's rapidly loading up with lots of people, and Tim is a big step up from Ron DeSanctimonious, who is totally unelectable. It doesn't sound like former President Trump is worried about you.
Well, I'll say this, I'd appreciate his vote as well. So the truth of the matter is that I do think that the power of persuasion is necessary for the next president. I happen to look forward to being that next president, and so I will take all votes I can get from anyone, anywhere, anytime as I head into this election.
You're saying, I'm listening to you. You're saying you're a better deal maker than President Trump, former President Trump?
What I'm saying is that I look forward to persuading the American people, right and left, within my base and on the far side, to making sure that we move this country forward using common sense, finding common ground. It's one of the reasons why I said, and I meant it when I said it, whether it's a boardroom or classroom, whether it's skeptics, even in a church, I plan to take my message to every corridor of this nation.
Would you ever try to overturn an election you lost?
No.
What do you think about President Trump's behavior after the 2020 election into January 6th?
Yes. We can do two things here. We can have a conversation about President Trump, or we can have a conversation about my vision for the future. I'm going to stay on my vision for the future for a couple of reasons.
But it was a historical moment. I think voters deserve to know.
Actually, I was actually in there, so I know exactly how historic it was. But what I will say is simply this, that the future that America is focusing on is what I'm going to provide.
How are you different from Governor Ron DeSantis, you think?
A couple of things I'd say. Number one, having an optimistic, positive message that is actually anchored in conservatism and in optimism matters a lot.
Let's talk about some of the issues now, and abortion. I want to start there. There's been some back and forth. I want to know, and you've spoken so much in the campaign trail about abortion, and yet today in your announcement, there were only a few words it sounded like. Where do you stand on abortion?
Well, I believe that life has intrinsic value because it comes from God. I have 100% pro-life voting record. I'm 100% pro-life conservative. As President of the United States, I would sign the most conservative legislation, pro-life legislation that can get to my desk. Here's the issue, though. Nothing can get to my desk unless we first win the hearts and minds of the American people.
Former President Trump has said the 6-week, or at least he signaled that 6-week ban, it may be too harsh. What do you say to that? Is it too harsh? Is 6 weeks too much?
I'll just repeat what I've already said, which is having states that appreciate the culture of life is a good thing. Having Congress pass something so that I, as President of the United States, have a chance to sign it will first require us to win the hearts and minds.
If you had a chance, now, according to your plan, if it went through Congress, would you be in favor of a federal ban on abortion?
We won't see legislation like that come through Congress if we don't first win the hearts and minds of the American people.
But you think that would be a good idea? You wouldn't be opposed to that?
I'm not suggesting, I'm only saying what I'm saying. So
I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
Well,
yeah.
let me say it very clearly.
Yeah.
If we don't win, the American people on either side of this debate for life, nothing gets through Congress. What legislation do we have today that gets through Congress? I've co-sponsored a 20-week bill. I've signaled very clearly. I signed a 15-week bill. Here's what we know. None of that is possible. So we're having hypothetical conversations until we actually have a serious conversation with the American people. And that's why I think you have to have a president with the power of persuasion.
What would you say to a female voter who says, I like Senator Tim Scott, I want to turn the page from Trump, but I don't want him messing with my body?
I would say, this is a simple conversation. Until we have the power of persuasion, there is not a legislative path forward.
Well, I don't even understand. I'm sorry, Senator. I'm trying to follow you. Like, explain that to me. A woman says, I like your policies. I like your message. I want to move past Trump. I don't want you to infringe on my abortion rights.
Republicans have had a very tough time. They had a tough time in the midterms. We've seen state after state sort of reject harsh abortion restrictions. I want to know what you would do and how you would be able to win both in a primary and a general election.
Yeah, well, I think my message actually works. You're stuck on abortion. I'm not. So the truth is that if we continue to have a conversation about the culture of life, I think we'll have more converts.
Let's turn to Ukraine. Governor DeSantis initially described the war in Ukraine as a territorial dispute. Yeah. Do you agree with him?
Here's what I say. President Biden has done a terrible job explaining and articulating to the American people what is America's vital national interest in Ukraine. From my perspective and from the American people's perspective, that answer is degrading the Russian military. The more we degrade the Russian military, the less likely there is to be attack on our sovereign territory, and it protects our NATO partners. I think that we should be in Ukraine. I believe that the truth is simple, that degrading the Russian military is in America's best interest.
So to be clear, you disagree with him on that point. You do not think, you think it's much bigger than a territorial dispute.
Obviously.
You know, you are speaking very strongly on Ukraine, and former President Trump signaled that he didn't care who won or lost between Ukraine and Russia. Was he wrong?
Well, I've said this a couple times, and I'll just say it one more time. I think understanding and then articulating America's position and why we're in Ukraine is really helpful to the American people. Here's what people are saying all over the country. We need a president who understands and then clearly identifies America's national interests.
Let's go to China. If you were president and China invaded Taiwan, would you defend Taiwan and use the full force of the U.S. military?
Well, that's a hypothetical situation that we should understand. I think the first thing we would do is, number one, help the American people understand our national vital interests in Taiwan as well, understand what it would be required for us to be successful and effective against China. Having had conversations with folks in the NSA and other parts of the administration, previous administration as well, Taiwan is an absolute essential component for America. I think having the ability to defend Taiwan is critically important.
I appreciate the answer, Senator. I do want to go back to the question, would we defend Taiwan if China invaded?
I'll just give you my same answer because at the end of the day, working through the scenarios are important, and making sure that the American people understand our national vital interest in Taiwan is important. We have said very clearly and very consistently that we stand shoulder to shoulder. It's one of the reasons why we continue exercises with the Taiwanese people. So I would think that having the opportunity to first distill the importance of Taiwan, second, continue to provide the resources, third, continue to provide the equipment and the military weaponry, puts us in the strongest position. And if necessary, then we make that decision at the time.
You mentioned this in your speech. It's about China buying American farmland, infiltrating our airspace, and tracking our kids.
Yes.
Should we ban TikTok?
We should certainly sever the Chinese relationship with TikTok. That's the real question that parents have. We have 150 million folks that are using TikTok in this country, from my understanding. The question is there a way for us to stop China from being able to have surveillance on our kids? I think disconnecting China from that is really important.
What does that mean, though, disconnecting? It's a Chinese
There's
company.
a test. You could sell it. You could actually, there's a program, a project called the Texas Project, I believe is the actual name of it, that provides ways for us to use cloud computing to disconnect the relationship, to sever it. I think we have to look at the alternatives on the table. It's one of the reasons why I wrote a letter talking about the need to use our CFIUS.
Your colleagues have called it digital fentanyl. You've talked a lot about fentanyl, that it can influence elections, suggested that it could be used to spy. This is all TikTok.
Yeah.
And I bring this up to you because your top donor is Larry Ellison. He's the CEO of Oracle. TikTok servers in America are run by Oracle. Does that trouble you at all?
The ability to sever the relationship with China is absolutely essential. I've said this before. It doesn't matter who the donors are. What matters is the American people. It matters protecting our kids. This is a simple concept. If you can sever the relationship, get it done, whether that's a sale or any other possible way.
But it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable at all?
What part?
Oracle hosting those servers, an American company hosting the TikTok servers.
We should sever the relationship with China.
I want to talk about some social issues here. You're an athlete growing up.
Yes.
You think a teenage boy who transitions to female should compete in girls' sports?
No.
Would you support any type of legislation? Would you support federal legislation to ban transgender athletes?
Well, listen, I think the challenge of allowing for someone who's, listen, I was a college athlete, like you said. I had the opportunity to be on the football field. I understand that the advantage of being a male competing against women have. Unfortunately, I don't agree with that.
Do you think we need a federal law?
Well, I would support making sure that women compete against women and men compete against men.
Senator Scott, they're the sixth Republican to enter the race, but can he make his own path to the nomination? I want to bring in NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks so much for joining us for this special edition of Top Story tonight. You heard about 13 minutes right there of our interview. The power of persuasion, is that the phrase that's going to help Senator Tim Scott catch fire with voters across this country, Republican voters?
I don't know about Republican primary voters. I think his message is a general election message. And I think it could be a really good general election message for an outsider Republican who, if he somehow pulled the upset. But this is not necessarily what Republican primary voters are looking for. There's a little more grievance, a little more anger, a little more. And you got to this. I mean, you pushed him on this issue. It's sort of like he feels as if he is out of sync with messaging-wise, tonally, really, not less message, tonally, with where the Republican base is. This is a ginned-up base. This is a let's go, let's fight base. And so, look, if he could get to a general election, I think that the voters that are frustrated with both parties right now and don't like Biden and Trump, they will eat that message up. That's what they want. We want a president who wants to be a 60% president again. But I don't know if primary voters want that, Tom.
You know, you've seen the polling, right? I know it's still early, and a lot of these are national polls, but in some polls you have Trump out ahead, 40%, even from Governor Ron DeSantis, right? He's way out there. And Governor DeSantis has double digits. People like Senator Tim Scott are in the single digits. I asked him, and I was pushing him to draw a contrast, right? And the contrast he drew with former President Trump was that he could maybe persuade voters, persuade the other aisle, so more of a deal maker. With Governor DeSantis, it was interesting. I don't know if you caught this, Chuck, but he said basically that his arguments, right, are based in optimism and rooted in conservatism. It was a clear knock to Governor DeSantis. Where do you think he's going with that?
Look, I think it goes back to he's the happy warrior. Right? And Ron DeSantis is angry, and he's going after Disney, and Donald Trump is angry. He's going to be the retribution. So this goes, look, it is who he is. If he were trying to run the DeSantis campaign or trying to run Trump, you'd be like, what is that? That's not the Tim Scott that people got to know in the United States Senate. So this is who he is. The question is going to be whether voters are going to buy this. Now, that said, look, if you told me on Labor Day, he was in double digits and a solid third place and had the highest favorable rating of any candidate because DeSantis and Trump were beating each other up all summer, and Scott was taking advantage of his financial advantage, and he's got a big one as far as spending money early in Iowa and New Hampshire. So I could picture him sort of benefiting from the mud fight a little bit. But I think there's a ceiling on that because I don't think that's a majority of Republican primary voters.
How hard is it to sort of run that general campaign, right? That general election campaign and that primary campaign in this era? Because even on abortion, he would say, you know, in one answer, he is the most pro-life candidate. But then when you try to nail him down on 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, it takes him a while to get there.
Look, I admire what he's trying to do. He's trying to keep himself viable in a general election. I really think Ron DeSantis has hurt himself by being connected to 6 weeks. Donald Trump has his own issues that make him, I think, a problem with swing voters in the general election. So I think it's pretty clear he knows that he can't win a general. No Republican can win a general if they're too restrictive on abortion. And he didn't want to go there at all. You know, I was very curious to see what his answer was going to be on abortion to you, Tom, because, you know, when he rolled out the exploratory committee about 3 weeks ago, over a 72-hour period, it felt like he was all over the map. And in many ways, he was with you, too. He didn't want to be pinned down. And I think he sees the polling. He realizes that's not where you want to be in a general election. But again, can you get through a primary that is just on fire with anger? I've talked to some other rival campaigns, and they believe just the opposite theory of the case of Scott, that you've got to be the angriest candidate if you have a shot at beating Trump.
You know, finally, we saw this tweet that I asked him about, right? I've never seen former President Trump do anything like this, where he actually compliments an opponent, right? Welcomes him to the race, takes a shot at DeSantis. Do you think, I mean, I probably know the answer to this, but I want to ask you, do you think former President Trump welcomes Senator Scott into this race because he knows the more people that join this race, the better it is for him?
Yeah, 100%. And he also knows Scott's not coming after him. Now, that said, if Scott's a threat, he'll go after Scott. He does not view Scott as a threat right now. And you know what? The fact of the matter is, there's a scenario here where Tim Scott never runs for president because Ron DeSantis is a juggernaut. All of the major donors are with him. They're not looking for a hedge. They're not looking for somebody else. But the last 5 months haven't been kind to Ron DeSantis, and it has made a lot of donors go shopping, and a lot of them want to park themselves with Tim Scott. He is in some ways the Switzerland of the Republican primary field. It's a safe place to be, to sit while DeSantis and Trump have this knockdown, drag-out fight.
And it's still so early, Chuck, as we know, and even in the Iowa caucuses, we have been surprised GOP primary after GOP primary. So we're going to have to wait and see. Chuck, we thank you for joining us tonight. For more on the state of the 2024 race for the White House, I want to bring in our expert panel tonight for more political analysis. NBC's Ali Vitale, who's here in South Carolina covering Senator Tim Scott's announcement and his campaign for president. Caitlin Bird, senior politics reporter for The Post and Courier here in South Carolina. I've been reading all of her reporting over the past couple of years. Eugene Scott, Axios senior politics reporter. He's in the house. He joins us live as well. NBC's Dasha Burns is in Tallahassee covering Ron DeSantis ahead of his anticipated presidential announcement this week. And Mark Lauder, this is a massive panel of the best minds in politics, Chief Communications Officer for America First Policy Institute and former Director of Strategic Communications for the 2020 Donald Trump presidential campaign. I welcome you all, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. I do want to start with my colleague over here, Ali Vitale, who's been covering the Tim Scott campaign for so long. Ali, talk to me about Tim Scott's message and in that interview, because if people were looking for the fight, they're finding a different type of fight.
And that's not surprising, because it's what senior officials told us to expect from him, which is that he's not going to be someone who's out here swinging at his opponents, because in order to attack, people first have to know who you are. The fact that he's polling between 1% and 3% means he needs to introduce himself. He's got the money to do that, and he's going to be spending it over the course of the next few weeks, especially in Iowa and New Hampshire. The things that really stood out to me, though, in your interview, you did such a great job pushing him on this, the idea that you have to now ask these candidates, will you support if you lose an election, or are you going to fight that, is stunning, because we live in a small d democracy. The fact that he answered concisely is important, but that he wouldn't expand on January 6th, I think, is going to be a really important litmus test for these candidates. And then on abortion, I think you're right that it's hard for him, and Chuck is also correct in saying it's his attempt to remain viable. But women in the suburbs are where this race is going to be won and lost in the general. So if you're trying to keep yourself viable, even through a primary that is going to hinge on this issue, I know he said that you were stuck on it, but I meet voters who are Republicans who are stuck on this. It is so important to them.
Mark Lauder, I want to go to you, because maybe you can take us inside the mind of former President Trump, or at least of his campaign, right? What do you think he would think watching Senator Tim Scott and then watching that interview where he tried to draw a distinction with former Trump, but it was in the nicest possible way, if you will, right? And on top of that, you have this welcome tweet from him as well, which is highly unusual from the former president.
Yeah, I think you and Chuck had it right in the previous segment. President Trump does not view Tim Scott as a threat yet. If he does, then I think the tone will change. And so right now, he's welcoming. He wants that big field. And I think Tim Scott was very smart in avoiding those direct comparisons. He's going to talk about his issues with that optimism. Although the one thing I did notice in his announcement, and I do think will play well in a primary, is that while you and Chuck were talking about people are angry in the Republican primary, I'm not sure it's anger. They want to see a fighter. And I think you got that fight a little bit out of Tim Scott, which is what they want to see, but not crossing over into an area where it's just outright anger.
I'm going to go to a different Scott here, Eugene Scott. Eugene, talk to us about how you think Senator Tim Scott pans out, right, during this Republican primary, he is a different type of candidate. As we mentioned, he's the only black Republican in the Senate, and he's going to bring sort of this message of optimism. I do want to remind our viewers, though, if you look back at the Iowa caucuses and who won, Donald Trump did not win the Iowa caucus in 2016. Senator Ted Cruz did. And when you go down from there, Rick Santorum, Governor Huckabee, sometimes the most Christian-centric candidate in the race can pull off a victory in Iowa.
Indeed, and if you watch this announcement speech, there were moments that felt very much like a church service. He was walking through the aisle, connecting with voters in ways very similar to the way in which a pastor would talk to his congregants. And what Tim Scott is hoping to do is connect with some of these voters on the far right, but also swing voters who really do want someone who is more compassionate and reminiscent of the compassionate conservatism that the GOP used to champion in years past. But whether or not he's going to be able to win enough people outside of those GOP tribes who support his view on LGBT issues, especially with youth, on abortion, it's going to be a real challenge for him. The party has moved right, and whether or not he can keep those on the right while winning new people still remains to be seen.
Caitlin, I want to bring you in here. You probably know Senator Tim Scott best, more than any other reporter. And I want to ask you, what's going to happen in South Carolina? Because after Iowa, we go to New Hampshire and we come right down here. And I've seen polling out of South Carolina. Senator Tim Scott, your own senator, is in the single digits here. And he's also sort of fighting for voters with former Governor Nikki Haley.
Yeah, you're right. They're going to be on a collision course. And at some point, they are going to have to address each other. I am waiting for that moment to happen. I don't know if they're going to prolong it until the debate in August, assuming that they both qualify for it. Maybe they don't qualify for it, but they are competing with even on message, right? They're both talking about a more optimistic future for the GOP. And remember, back in 2016, they were standing together supporting Marco Rubio, supporting this new vision of a Republican Party that was more reflective of the America that they see today here in South Carolina and across the country. So it really is going to be a battle royale, but that's what South Carolina Republican primaries are known for.
But do you think South Carolina voters, if Tim Scott gains some momentum, he does well in Iowa, possibly New Hampshire, he comes down here with a little bit of that big mo, do you think that South Carolina voters then change their vote and they start considering their senator for their candidate? Or do you think Donald Trump is just so popular in the state?
I think Donald Trump has locked in a strong base of popularity. There's no denying that. But I do think that we have to remember that even as recently as November, there are Republican presidential primary voters who just voted for Senator Tim Scott to go back to the Senate. So he is a more familiar face. And we've had a lot of people who've moved here in a couple years who might actually be more familiar with Tim Scott than even with Nikki Haley.
Dasha, so earlier, I'll go back to last week, Governor DeSantis was only getting the incoming really from former President Trump. Now he's getting a little bit from Senator Tim Scott, again, in a very polite and pleasant manner. But he's essentially questioning, I would say, the governor's conservative credentials. Do you think we'll hear from Governor DeSantis on this? And is it something that he's going to have to be on defense about once he heads into the campaign trail?
Yeah, Tom, I actually don't think we will hear from the governor about this necessarily. I think it's possible that we'll hear from his super PAC about this, Never Back Down. That's sort of been his outside attack dog. But look, as I've been following this not yet campaign, they really see this as a two-man race, and they are going to play this as a two-man race. So whether it's Scott or Haley or some other potential hopefuls, whether it's Mike Pence or Chris Christie or whoever may get into this, yeah, they are going to try to take down DeSantis early. I don't think you're going to see DeSantis get into the fight with them. I think the target is on Trump's back for them. I think they are very much have tunnel vision with this, and I think that that's what they kind of need right now, because that is the man that they're really up against here. And I think that Trump may have done them a massive favor, actually, with that tweet that you keep referencing, welcoming Tim Scott into the race, because what that does is shows that Trump does not think Scott is a threat. And yet when you look at the former president's social media feed over the last several weeks, if not months, a whole lot of that feed is dedicated to going after very directly Governor Ron DeSantis. And what does that tell you, if not that he does find the governor as a threat and not some of these other candidates?
Do we know why Governor DeSantis is choosing this week? This was going to be Senator Tim Scott's week, and then we got the breaking news last week that you were part of that reporting team, that DeSantis was going to do something this week. Is there going to be an announcement? Do we have any more reporting on that?
Well, I think maybe there is some interest in stealing the spotlight from Tim Scott a little bit. And look, you watch Scott there today. He can turn a stump speech into a sermon. He's able to really captivate the audience in a sort of way that's not DeSantis's strength, right? So I think you're going to see something very different coming out of the DeSantis campaign. They've been holding the details of what this launch, of what this announcement is going to look like very close to the vest, but they have to find a way to set up that contrast, to set him up as that top challenger to former President Trump. So we don't know what this is going to look like yet. We can't report that out yet, but I assume that it's going to be something that is going to look quite different than some of the other candidates jumping in right now. Tom.
Mark Lauder, you understand the MAGA movement, right? You worked for former President Trump. You worked for former Vice President Mike Pence. That's a whole different segment. But I do want to ask you, do you think this race right now is the former president's to lose?
At this point, it looks like it. And the bigger challenge is that when you're 35 or so points up, 37, according to the Real Clear Politics average, the only way you're going to close that gap is to attack Donald Trump. But then you're going to turn around and need those exact same MAGA supporters, assuming that you're successful, to vote for you in a general election. It's a very difficult uphill climb. It's one of the reasons why I think you see the former president welcoming a very large field. He'll pick them off one at a time, as opposed to the entire movement galvanizing around one single candidate to take him on directly.
Allie, Senator Scott has a very close relationship with the former president. He writes about this in his book. Yeah. He took his mom on Air Force One, right? He or his family spoke with the former president about a pardon that ended up happening. Yeah. There's a tight relationship there. Do you think in any way Senator Scott's also thinking in the back of his head, I'm going to run for president, but I also don't want to maybe upset the former president too much?
And also, he's going to need to pick a VP at some point.
Yeah.
So if he falls short here, what's the downside? I do think that there's a close relationship with Trump. Scott is in an interesting position because unlike Nikki Haley and Mike Pence, who really owe the fact that their last jobs were by the guy who's now their central opponent, Tim Scott didn't need the endorsement of Donald Trump to re-win his re-election. He didn't need Donald Trump to elevate him to a cabinet position. He doesn't owe Trump his political career. But at the same time, the things that he was taking credit for today, opportunity zones, for example, the Trump tax cuts, those are things that Scott was able to do because Trump was president. He loves the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs. That was something that was able to be done because Trump was president. So he's in this really fascinating space where he can play with that. I do think I disagree with Dasha a little bit that this Truth Social is a gift to the DeSantis team in some way, because what Republican has Trump gone after and lost to?
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who's gone toe-to-toe with Trump trying to out-Trump the former president and won on that. And the fact is, when I talk to my sources, and I know you hear the same things, is that they're happy for Trump to take care of DeSantis because it opens up that second spot, and all of them are happy to vie for it.
Right, but there are a large pool of Republican voters that do want to move on past Trump.
Right.
We'll see if that happens. How is Senator Scott on the debate stage?
That's a great question. We haven't seen Senator Scott on a debate stage in more than a decade. That's a totally different era of Republican politics. Yeah. So I'm very curious to see how he does on a debate stage, because that's a moment that a candidate who is polling in those goose egg numbers is going to need to create something to build momentum.
Eugene, before we go, I do want to get sort of look into your crystal ball, if you will, and tell me, who do you think is going to be entering the race in the coming couple of weeks, right? And how is it going to shake up the Republican primary?
Well, I think we need to pay attention to Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, Sununu from New Hampshire. These are individuals who seem as if they will be able to carve a lane that is distinct from the individuals that we have currently seen enter the race. And they seem as if they are maybe willing to attack Trump in ways that no one else has. And if they do, that can make this primary far more interesting than it has been so far.
Eugene Scott, Ali Vitale, Dasha Burns, Mark Lauder, and Caitlin Bird, we thank you so much for joining this special edition of Top Story. We love that panel. Talked a lot of politics. We'll have much more of my exclusive interview with Senator Tim Scott later in the broadcast, including how his upbringing in the South helped shape who he is and the major role faith plays in his life. But we do want to turn now to another major headline we're following: the debt ceiling talks stalled in a deadlock, a high-stakes negotiation session between President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy ending late today without a deal. This as the U.S. quickly is running out of a runway to pay its bills. Kelly O'Donnell reports.
Tonight, facing a dire default deadline, the president and the House Speaker go one-on-one.
I think we may be able to get where we have to go. We both know we have a significant responsibility.
We both agree that we need to change the trajectory that our debt is too large.
Coming together without other congressional leaders late today after financial markets closed. Negotiators also met on Capitol Hill. House Republicans want to reduce overall spending and say Democrats are not willing to cut enough.
I think we can get a deal tonight, we get a deal tomorrow, but you've got to get something done this week to be able to pass it and move it to the Senate.
Adding to the pressure, a fresh assessment from the Treasury Secretary. The country's ability to borrow is highly likely to run out as early as June 1st, triggering default and what economists say would cause job losses, stock market declines, and recession. That might even include a delay in federal financial benefits owed to Gold Star families, like Teresa Jones, a Navy widow with 2 sons. Her husband, a chopper pilot, was killed in 2013.
It would absolutely be an added burden in trying to figure out, okay, where is the mortgage, where are the funds for that going to come? Where are the grocery bills coming from?
And the timing, so close to Memorial Day, when emotions are already raw.
I'm frustrated for my family, for my Gold Star, friends, their families. I don't understand why this has to be so difficult.
The stress compounding her loss.
Tom, President Biden is making a new point now. He says this is a critical moment that both he and the Speaker must be able to sell whatever deal they can reach to their own parties. I had a chance to ask the president if spending figures are the key to resolving this dispute, and he said not that alone. He also wants to talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, and that is a non-starter for Republicans.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell for us. Kelly, we appreciate that. Still ahead tonight, Bryan Kohberger in court, the suspect in the University of Idaho slayings, appearing before a judge for the first time since a grand jury indicted him on murder. What happened when he was asked to enter a plea? Plus, history up in flames, a landmark post office with ties to World War II destroyed in the Philippines. The investigation now underway. And the father caught on camera saving his 1-year-old son from drowning, while a local fire department is sharing that video as a warning to other parents. Stay with us. Top stories just getting started. We're back now with the latest on the murders of 4 students at the University of Idaho. The suspect, Bryan Kohberger, appearing in Moscow, Idaho, in a courtroom today for the first time since he was indicted by a grand jury on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 burglary count. When asked to enter a plea, Kohberger's attorney saying he chose to stand silent, so the judge entered a not guilty plea for each charge on his behalf. The judge also set a trial date for October 2nd, nearly a year after those 4 young victims were found stabbed to death in an off-campus house. I want to bring in a friend of Top Story, Angela Senadella. You may know her as the lawyer Angela on TikTok. She's got more than 1 million followers. She's been helping us out with legal cases here on Top Story since we launched. Angela, I want to start with Kohberger's decision to stand silent today and have the judge enter the not guilty plea on his behalf. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. What's the legal strategy here?
Yeah, Tom, that is very unusual. I don't think I've really seen it before. However, in this case, it seems intimately tied to the prosecutorial pursuit of the possible death penalty. And that's because there is extensive research that shows that prosecutors will use the potential of offering the death penalty as leverage in securing a guilty plea. We know here the prosecutors have 60 days remaining to declare whether or not they will actually pursue this. I'm sure there's extensive negotiations happening right now with his defense team and the prosecutors. It's possible that he thought if he does actually say not guilty out loud, then the prosecutors would definitively pursue the death penalty. I mean, it's also possible that he's trying to lay ground for some sort of an insanity defense or mental illness. Mental illness is a mitigating factor for the death penalty as well. Or he just decided, I don't want to say anything. It's unclear.
Yeah, it was definitely a strange moment, but you bring up a lot of good points, and I'm sure we'll learn much more in the weeks ahead. We've also heard a lot about the alleged murder weapon, right? That K-bar knife sheath that was found at the scene, which prosecutors say had Kohberger's DNA on it. Now sources tell Dateline he had searched for and bought that type of knife in the months before the murders. If you're Kohberger's lawyer, how concerning is that of a revelation?
Tom, this is massively concerning, and it really just suspends belief that he could really be a PhD criminology student and not realize that your digital footprint is forever. If you bought the knife that was used in the murder on Amazon, it's tracked to you. That is definitive evidence. So I think as the defense attorneys, if they are seeing this right now, they are freaking out and thinking we really should push for a guilty plea here.
Angela, before we wrap up, let me know what you're looking for as a legal analyst in this case in the coming days and weeks.
Well, I think that the evidence here is just so significant. So what I am looking for is to see what the defense will come out and rebut all of this stuff that's been put forth by the prosecution. We've seen so much coming out with the affidavits, with the digital footprint, with the Hyundai Elantra, with the cell phone footage that was taken that tracks his location from when he was leaving the area and whether or not he really did turn his phone off during that exact 2 hours. Also, the forensic evidence that is attached to his house, his car. We haven't seen all of that come out yet, but that will all be incredibly important in deciding whether or not this man will be convicted.
Angela Senadella for us again on Top Story. Angela, we always appreciate your time and your work. When we come back, an incredible rescue in Nebraska. Bystanders racing to save a motorcyclist who was trapped under a car. Why police are now asking for the public to help identify those Good Samaritans. All right, we are back now with Top Stories news feed, and we begin with the investigation into the deadly shooting of a tribal member by Border Patrol agents in southern Arizona. A family member telling NBC's Tucson affiliate the man had called border agents for help after allegedly spotting migrants trespassing on his property. That family member says he went outside to speak to the agents. He was shot and killed. The FBI and tribal police are now investigating. Heart-stopping new video shows the moment one California firefighter saves his son from nearly drowning. A Ring camera capturing the moment a 1-year-old removes his flotation device before sitting down at the side of the pool and then jumping into the water. His fast-acting dad quickly sliding over and pulling him out to safety. Luckily, that child was okay, but a local fire department posting that video saying this is a reminder to always watch children when they are near the water. Another incredible rescue caught on camera, this time in Nebraska. Dash cam video out of Omaha shows a group of bystanders lifting a car off a motorcyclist who was pinned under the car. A police officer then able to pull the man out, and he was taken to the hospital. No word yet on his condition. Police are now asking for help in identifying those Good Samaritans to thank them for their action. And an update tonight, TikTok has sued the state of Montana over a ban on the social media app. We've been following this closely on Top Story. The app's parent company filing a federal lawsuit saying the ban is a violation of the First Amendment because it, quote, bridges freedom of speech. As we've reported, Montana became the first U.S. state to ban the popular app over privacy concerns. That ban would go into effect on January 1st, 2024. Okay, we turn now to the Americas and the deadly stampede outside of a soccer game in El Salvador. The horror unfolding as a massive crowd of fans pushed through the gates of the stadium. We want to warn you, some of the images may be graphic. George Solis has this story.
Tragedy in El Salvador as a wave of fans stormed an access gate at a soccer match, the crush killing 12 people and hospitalizing almost 100 more. You can see the massive crowd of people pushing through a gate at Cuscatlan Stadium, one of the largest in Central America. And another view shows fans trying to open more doors to give the compressed swarm of people some breathing room. What was supposed to be a night of football fervor between two top teams halted just about 16 minutes into the match. The pitch transforming into a makeshift triage center with emergency responders overwhelmed. Fans carrying the wounded from the tunnel to the playing field, where some 500 people were treated for injuries, officials say. Many seen frantically waving shirts in attempts to revive those crushed in the chaos. Others left to face the horror. Over the weekend, government officials livid, responding to reports that some fans obstructed rescue efforts.
Esto es repudiable.
Officials looking into claims the stampede may have been fueled by over-ticketing and restricted access into the stadium.
Muchos aficionados mostraron incluso que les vendieron boletos falsos.
El Salvador's president promising an exhaustive investigation. Among the injured, Hector Rivas, telling reporters he attended the quarterfinal matchup with his 14-year-old son. Now, the country's soccer federation declaring a nationwide suspension of games as victims' family members prepare for funerals and demand justice.
Tienen que tener cerebro para esos eventos, pues.
The country now mourning the loss of sport and too many lives. George Solis, NBC News.
An all-around sad situation there in El Salvador. Coming up, the volcanic eruption. Italy's Mount Etna covering parts of Sicily in volcanic ash. How it impacted flights to and from a popular tourist destination. Stay with us. Back now with top stories Global Watch and a deadly shootout in Mexico just 15 miles south of the U.S. border. Mexican authorities say a van full of gunmen ambushed drivers taking part in a Baja California road race. At least 10 people were killed. Investigators believe the attack was linked to cartel violence. In the Philippines, a fire destroying a landmark post office, flames ripping through the nearly 100-year-old building in the capital city there of Manila. The fire broke out while it was closed, but several firefighters suffered minor injuries. The post office was built in 1926, but was heavily damaged during World War II and was restored in 1946. The cause is still under investigation. And Italy's Mount Etna erupting again and grounding some flights in Sicily. New video shows planes and a runway there covered in volcanic ash at Catania Airport. Flights in and out of a popular tourist area were delayed for hours but have since resumed. No one was hurt. Mount Etna is Europe's most active volcano and erupts several times a year. When we come back, Senator Tim Scott's journey to presidential candidate, more of my exclusive interview with the South Carolina Republican, how his grandfather, who was forced to pick cotton in the Jim Crow South, helped shape who he is today, and the moment the senator found his faith, and how he'd feel being one of the only bachelors to ever serve in the White House if he wins. Stay with us. Back now with more of our conversation with 2024 presidential hopeful Tim Scott. We also talked about his incredible backstory, from his humble beginnings in the Jim Crow South to his discovery of religion to hints about his relationship status.
Today I'm thinking back to my grandfather, born in 1921 in Sally, South Carolina, in the Deep South. By the time he was in the 3rd grade, he was forced out of school, his education was over, and he was forced to start picking cotton. But my grandfather lived long enough to watch his grandson pick out a seat in Congress.
Senator, you know, it was pretty incredible watching your speech there. You mentioned your grandfather picking cotton, and then today you announced you're running for president.
Yeah.
What's that like?
It's really an amazing journey. So much of it has to do with the evolution of the American heart, how much has changed in a single lifetime. I do think back, and I did this morning before I went on stage, just thinking back to my grandfather. 1921, the real Jim Crow South, where you're walking off the sidewalk of a white person's coming, you don't make eye contact. The indignities of life that were his everyday reality. And to think that when I was 7 years old, moving into his place when my parents divorced, literally having that guy tell me, you can be bitter or better? That was, thinking about it now, back, it's unbelievable that he had that kind of faith in what could be.
Can you share with me the moment where you gave your life to Christ?
Yeah. So I think the moment that matters the most was right after I had a car accident. Yeah. I was driving my car down the interstate in 1982. I found myself going through the windshield, coming back in the car, and devastated. Lost 6 weeks of my senior football season. And for me, football was my entire life. And I thought it was the best path out of poverty. I know what it feels like to walk into my home, hit the light switch, and nothing happens. I know what it feels like to be hungry. I'll say without any question that started the process of turning towards faith.
Yeah.
And about a year later, I found that life's ultimate meaning had less to do with just my selfish ambitions and more to do with serving a greater cause.
There's a question America would love for you to answer. If you become president, you'd be like Grover Cleveland and James Buchanan. You would go as a bachelor, as a single man. Is there someone in your life? Is there time for a woman in your life right now?
Well, there's always time for a great relationship with a wonderful woman, and I thank God that is happening. But we're gonna leave it there.
And we, too, will leave it right there as well. We want to thank you so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas, and again, beautiful South Carolina. A live look tonight over Charleston Southern University. A big thank you to the entire staff here who helped us out with the show and with that big interview. We truly appreciate it. Top Story will be making stops on the campaign trail throughout the election. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.